My name is Marcus Chun, and I'm 24 years old. I moved to Louisville, Kentucky in early 2023 for work, and I've always been interested in paranormal investigation, so when I heard about Waverly Hills Sanatorium, I knew I had to visit it. For those who don't know, Waverly Hills is one of the most haunted locations in America. It was a tuberculosis hospital that operated from 1910 to 1961, and over the decades, thousands of patients died there from the White Plague. The place has a reputation, stories about shadow people walking halls, about a nurse who hung herself on the 5th floor, about a little boy named Timmy who rolls balls down the corridors. On Halloween night 2023, I signed up for one of their overnight paranormal investigations. They run these tours where you can explore the building with ghost hunting equipment for 8 hours through the night. I went with 2 friends from work, Sarah and Devin, neither of them believers in ghosts, but they thought it would be a fun Halloween adventure. We arrived at the hospital around 9 in the evening. The building is massive, 5 floors of empty corridors and abandoned patient rooms. Our guide gave us EMF detectors, spirit boxes, and flashlights, then explained the rules. Stay together, respect the property, don't go into the body chute without permission. The body chute is this tunnel that goes from the top floor down to the bottom of the hill. Back when tuberculosis was killing everyone, the hospital staff didn't want living patients to see dead bodies being carried out, so they built this tunnel to secretly remove corpses. Hundreds, maybe thousands of bodies went down that chute. It's the most haunted part of the entire building according to every paranormal investigator who's been there. The first 2 hours, nothing happened. We walked around the 3rd and 4th floors, tried using the equipment, felt nothing unusual. Sarah was making jokes about how this was a waste of money. Devin kept trying to scare us by jumping out from doorways. I was starting to think maybe all the ghost stories were just hype created by the tour company to sell tickets. Then around 11:30, we went up to the 5th floor. This is where the tuberculosis patients who were closest to death were kept. The most extreme cases, people who had no hope of recovery. Our guide told us about room 502, the room where that nurse allegedly committed suicide in 1928. She was pregnant and unmarried, which was scandalous back then, and according to legend, she hung herself from a light fixture. Her spirit supposedly still haunts that room. We walked down the hallway toward room 502, and I started feeling strange. The air felt heavier, colder, like walking into a freezer. Sarah noticed it too. She stopped making jokes. Devin said he felt nauseous suddenly. When we stepped into room 502, my EMF detector started going crazy. The lights were flashing from green to yellow to red, indicating a strong electromagnetic field. Our guide explained that spirits are believed to manipulate electromagnetic energy. But here's where it gets truly terrifying. Sarah had her phone out recording video. She was panning around the room when suddenly, on her screen, we saw something that wasn't visible to our naked eyes. In the corner of the room, through her phone camera, there was a figure. A woman in an old-fashioned white nurse's uniform. She was just standing there, completely still, staring directly at us. I felt every hair on my body stand up. Devin grabbed my arm so hard he left bruises. Sarah dropped her phone, and it clattered on the floor, the video still recording. We all saw it, all 3 of us, this woman who was visible through the phone camera, but not to our eyes. The guide quickly picked up Sarah's phone, and when we looked at the screen again, the figure was gone. He immediately ushered us out of the room and down the hallway. He was trying to stay calm, but I could tell he was shaken too. He said in 15 years of working at Waverly Hills, he had never seen anything that clear, that undeniable. We went down to the 2nd floor to regroup and catch our breath. Sarah was crying, not from fear exactly, but from the shock of seeing something that shouldn't exist. Devin kept saying there has to be a rational explanation. Maybe it was a reflection or a camera glitch. But we all knew what we saw. The guide let us take a break in what used to be the hospital cafeteria. He brought us water and told us that what we experienced was actually quite common in room 502. Dozens of visitors have reported seeing the nurse, some through cameras, some with their own eyes. He showed us other people's photos and videos on his tablet, images of the same woman in the same corner of the room. After about 30 minutes, we decided to continue the investigation. I know that sounds crazy. Why would we keep going after that? But there was something compelling about it. We had seen proof, actual proof of something paranormal, and instead of running away, we wanted to understand it. We went back upstairs, not to room 502, but to other parts of the 5th floor. The rest of the night was less dramatic, but still unsettling. We heard footsteps when no one was walking, doors closing on their own, and at one point all of our EMF detectors went off simultaneously in a patient room where a child supposedly died. The most disturbing moment came around 3 in the morning when we were in the old surgery room. This is where they used to perform experimental procedures on tuberculosis patients, often without anesthesia because they didn't have enough. Our guide asked if any spirits wanted to communicate with us. We were using a spirit box, which is a device that rapidly scans radio frequencies. The theory is that spirits can manipulate these frequencies to create words. Most of the time, it's just static and random fragments of radio broadcasts. But when our guide asked if anyone died in this room, through the static, we heard a clear voice, a woman's voice, say, "Help me." Everyone froze. The guide asked, "Can we help you?" And the voice came through again. It said, "Cold, so cold." Then the spirit box went completely silent, not even static, just dead air for about 10 seconds. When it came back on, all we heard was screaming. Not words, just a prolonged scream of agony coming through the device. Our guide immediately turned it off. He said that sometimes the spirits here are trapped in the moment of their death, experiencing their final suffering over and over. He said it's best not to engage too much with those spirits because there's nothing we can do to help them, and it only causes them more pain. We finished the investigation around 5 in the morning when the sun started to rise. Walking out of Waverly Hills into the daylight felt surreal, like waking up from a nightmare. In my car, we watched Sarah's video again and again. The figure in room 502 was clear as day on the recording. You could see details of her uniform, her face, even the sadness in her eyes. We posted it to a paranormal investigation forum on Reddit, and within days it had thousands of views. Skeptics said it was edited. Believers said it was one of the best pieces of evidence they'd ever seen. But we know the truth. We were there, we saw her, and nothing will ever convince me that ghosts aren't real. Halloween 2023 was supposed to be a fun night exploring a creepy building. Instead, it became the night that changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and what comes after. My name is Elena Rossi, and I live in Milan, Italy. I'm a photographer specializing in urban exploration, which means I photograph abandoned buildings. In October 2023, I traveled with my boyfriend Luca to photograph Villa de Vecchi, one of the most infamous abandoned mansions in Italy. It's located near Lake Como in the mountains of Cordonova. The local people call it Casa del Streg, the House of Witches. The mansion has a tragic history. It was built in the 1850s by Count Felix de Vecchi as a summer home for his family. But shortly after it was completed, the Count's wife was brutally murdered inside the house, and his young daughter was kidnapped. The Count searched for his daughter for a year, but never found her. Eventually, he died by suicide in the mansion. Since then, the house has been abandoned, and locals believe it's cursed. We arrived at the villa on Halloween evening, just as the sun was setting. The mansion is surrounded by thick forest, and there's a heavy fog that never seems to lift from the area. Even in photographs, the place looks otherworldly, like something from a gothic horror novel. The exterior is covered in peeling paint and graffiti. All the windows are broken, and vegetation has started to reclaim the building. We had to climb through a broken window on the ground floor to get inside. The interior was even more unsettling than I expected. The grand staircase is still intact but covered in debris. There are rooms full of broken furniture and old belongings that people have left behind over the decades. Every wall is covered in graffiti, some of it artistic, some of it disturbing. Pentagrams, occult symbols, messages in Italian warning people to leave. Luca and I split up to cover more ground before it got completely dark. I was photographing the second floor, which used to be the family's private quarters. There's a long hallway with rooms on both sides, each one more destroyed than the last. I was in what I believe was the daughter's bedroom based on the pink wallpaper that still remained. I was setting up my tripod for a long exposure shot when I heard something that made my blood freeze. Piano music. Someone was playing a piano somewhere in the house. But here's the thing, Villa de Vecchi is famous for specific legend. They say that even though the piano in the Grand Hall was smashed decades ago, people still hear it playing on foggy nights. I had read this legend before coming here, but I assumed it was just a story to attract urban explorers. I called out for Luca thinking maybe he was playing music on his phone to scare me. No response. The piano music continued, a sad melody, something classical that I didn't recognize. I walked down the hallway toward the grand staircase where the music seemed to be coming from. My camera was still in my hand, and I started recording video. As I descended the stairs, I could see into the main hall. There is indeed a destroyed piano there. I had seen it when we first entered, the strings all broken and hanging out, keys scattered across the floor. But as I watched, as I recorded, the music was coming from that broken piano. I stood there in complete shock. The rational part of my brain was trying to find an explanation, wind through the broken strings. But that wouldn't create a melody. A recording someone had hidden in the room? But I could see the room. There was nothing there but debris and broken furniture. Then something even more impossible happened. I saw movement near the piano. A figure, translucent like mist, sitting on the piano bench. I couldn't see details, couldn't tell if it was a man or woman, but the shape of a person was there, and their arms were moving, as if playing the keys. The music suddenly stopped. The figure turned its head toward me, and even though I couldn't see eyes or a face, I knew it was looking directly at me. I felt this overwhelming sadness, this grief, so profound it made me dizzy. I dropped my camera, and it fell down the stairs. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but pure instinct took over. I ran back up the stairs, screaming for Luca. I found him on the third floor and grabbed his arm, telling him we had to leave immediately. He saw the terror in my face and didn't argue. We climbed back out through the window we'd entered and ran through the fog to where we parked our car, about half a kilometer away. It wasn't until we were sitting in the car with the doors locked that I remembered I'd dropped my camera on the stairs. Luca wanted to go back for it. Cameras are expensive and all my photos from the day were on it. But there was no way I was going back inside that house. We sat there for a while trying to decide what to do. That's when we noticed something disturbing. The fog around the villa had gotten thicker, and it seemed to be moving in an unnatural way, swirling around the mansion like it was alive. Luca finally agreed we would come back the next morning to retrieve the camera when it was daylight. We drove to a small hotel in a nearby town, and neither of us slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure at the piano, felt that overwhelming sadness. The next morning we returned to Villa de Vecchi. In daylight the place looked less menacing, but still deeply unsettling. We climbed back through the window, and I stayed close to Luca this time. We found my camera at the bottom of the grand staircase, surprisingly undamaged, except for a cracked lens. I turned it on, and immediately checked the video I had been recording. My hands were shaking as I played it back. The video showed everything. The piano music is clearly audible on the recording. You can see the broken piano. And then clear as day, you can see the translucent figure sitting at the piano bench. The video runs for another few seconds, showing the figure turning toward me before the camera falls, and the recording stops. We posted the video to my Urban Exploration Instagram account, and it went viral. News outlets in Italy picked it up. Paranormal investigators contacted us wanting to know more. Some people claimed we faked it with special effects. But we couldn't have. We're just photographers, not video editors. The video has been analyzed by experts who say there's no evidence of digital manipulation. Local people from Cordonova weren't surprised at all when they saw our video. They told us that Villa de Vecchi has been producing paranormal activity for over a century. They said the Count's spirit still mourns his murdered wife and missing daughter, playing sad songs on the piano that no longer exists. They said we were lucky to escape when we did because many people who spend the night in that mansion claim to have been physically attacked by unseen forces. I haven't been back to Villa de Vecchi and I never will. That video is the last photograph I'll ever take in an abandoned building. Some places are abandoned for good reason. Some doors should stay closed. Some windows should remain broken and impassable. Whatever remains in that mansion, whatever sorrow and rage lingers in those halls, it's beyond anything I want to understand. Halloween 2023 taught me that my work as an urban explorer had always been walking a dangerous line between the living world and the dead one. And that night in the House of Witches, I crossed that line without meaning to. My name is Jasmine Park, and I'm 28 years old from Portland, Oregon. I've lived in Portland my whole life, and I've always known about Lone Fir Cemetery. It's one of the oldest cemeteries in the city, established in 1855. 25,000 people are buried there, but about 10,000 of those graves are unmarked or unidentified because of years of neglect. The cemetery is 30 acres of old trees and crumbling headstones, and has a reputation for being extremely haunted. There's stories about shadow figures, strange lights, voices calling out names. Most people avoid going there after dark. On Halloween night 2023, my friend Kenji and I decided to visit Lone Fir around midnight. I know this sounds stupid and disrespectful, but we were honestly just bored and thought it would be an adventure. Neither of us believed in ghosts at the time. We parked nearby and hopped the fence because the gates are locked at night. It was a clear night with a full moon, which provided enough light to see the paths between the graves. The cemetery was quiet except for the sound of wind through the enormous old fir trees that give the place its name. We walked along the main path looking at the Victorian-era headstones, many of them decorated with angels and skulls. About 15 minutes into our walk, we heard something that immediately put us on edge. Footsteps behind us, heavy footsteps like boots on gravel. We turned around and saw a figure about 30 meters away, standing under a large tree. It appeared to be a man wearing what looked like old-fashioned clothing, maybe from the 1800s based on the silhouette. We called out asking if he was security or a groundskeeper. No response. The figure just stood there completely still. Kenji and I looked at each other and decided we should probably leave. We were trespassing after all and didn't want to get in trouble. We started walking quickly back toward the fence where we'd entered. But here's where it gets truly frightening. As we walked away from the figure, we could still hear those heavy footsteps behind us. We looked back and the figure was following us, maintaining the same distance of about 30 meters. We walked faster, the footsteps behind us matched our pace. We started running. The footsteps ran too. I've never felt fear like that in my entire life, this primal terror of being chased by something unknown. We reached the fence and practically threw ourselves over it, scraping our hands on the metal. When we landed on the other side, we looked back. The figure was standing right at the fence, perfectly still again. And now that we were closer and the moonlight hit it properly, we could see details that made no sense. The man was translucent. Not invisible, but not solid either, like looking through frosted glass. We couldn't see his face clearly, but we could see through him to the headstones behind. He raised one arm and pointed at us, or maybe past us, we couldn't tell. Then we heard something that I still hear in my nightmares. A voice, multiple voices, dozens of voices, all speaking at once. They were saying names. Just names over and over. Sarah, David, Margaret, William, Elizabeth. On and on, dozens of different names spoken by these overlapping voices. Kenji grabbed my hand, and we ran to my car. As I was fumbling with my keys, I looked back at the cemetery one more time. The translucent man was gone, but now there were lights, maybe 8 or 10 small lights floating among the headstones, moving in patterns that seemed intentional. We drove away and parked a few blocks away to catch our breath and make sense of what we just experienced. Kenji was shaking, actually trembling. I pulled out my phone and searched for information about loan for cemetery hauntings. What I found made everything worse. There are multiple reports over the decades of people encountering a man matching the description of what we saw. But here's the disturbing part. People who see this figure often hear voices calling names. And according to paranormal investigators who have studied lone fir, those names are believed to be the unidentified graves, the 10,000 people buried there who have no markers, whose names were lost to time. They're calling out their names hoping someone will remember them, hoping someone will identify their graves so they can finally rest. I felt sick reading this. Kenji and I had disturbed this place on Halloween night, the one night when spirits are supposed to be most active, and we've been confronted by something we couldn't explain. We drove to a 24-hour diner and sat there until sunrise drinking coffee, neither of us wanting to go home alone. We talked about what we'd seen and tried to rationalize it. Maybe the figure was another person in costume playing prank. But that doesn't explain the translucence, the way we could see through him. Maybe the lights were fireflies. But it was late October, too cold for fireflies. Maybe the voices were wind through the trees. But wind doesn't speak names with such clarity. The next day, I posted about our experience on Reddit in a paranormal encounters thread. Dozens of people responded saying they'd had similar experiences at Lone Fir Cemetery. One person sent me a message with photos they'd taken at the cemetery years ago. In the background of one photo, barely visible, was a translucent figure that looked identical to what we had seen. Another person told me they'd been there on a different Halloween and heard the same voices calling names. They said they researched some of the names they heard and found obituaries matching those names from people who died in Portland in the late 1800s and were buried in unmarked graves at Lone Fir. This revelation changed something in me. These weren't just random ghosts trying to scare people. These were human beings, people who lived and loved and died, and their final resting place was forgotten. No family visits their graves because no one knows where they're buried. No flowers are left, no prayers said. They're just lost to history, and maybe, just maybe, they're trying to remind the living that they existed. After reading all these accounts and learning about the forgotten graves, Kenji and I decided to do something. We contacted the Lone Fir Cemetery Foundation, a group that maintains the historic cemetery and researches the unidentified graves. We volunteered to help with their project to identify and mark as many unknown graves as possible. It's been several months now, and we've helped identify and mark 12 previously unknown graves. It's slow work researching old death certificates and burial records, matching them to locations in the cemetery. But every time we successfully identify someone and place a proper marker on their grave, it feels important, meaningful. I haven't been back to Lone Fir at night, and I probably never will. But I think about that translucent figure often, about those voices calling names. Were they angry at us for trespassing? Or were they trying to communicate, trying to make sure their names aren't forgotten forever? I don't know the answer, and maybe I never will. What I do know is that Halloween 2023 at Lone Fir Cemetery taught me that the boundary between life and death is thinner than we think, and that being remembered matters even after we're gone.